Hey guys! This is our presentation on the Jacksonian era, questions 11 through 13 by
Emma,
Encore,
and Mara.
Question 11. Why did Andrew Jackson fight to kill the national bank starting in 1832, and what happened to the banking system in America? Jackson doesn't distrust all banks, but he hates monopolistic banks and overbig business. The Panic of 1819 is another huge reason why Jackson and his followers hate the banks. And now,
Story time with Mara. So Jackson's dislike of banking systems doesn't stem just from his political career, but from a personal experience. From when he went to Philadelphia to sell land to a businessman named David Allison and used the money that he earned to start a business. Allison went bankrupt and sent Jackson into debt, where he stayed in debt until money from the War of 1812 helped to pay it off, and the experience left him with a fear of banks.
bank politics. Henry Clay, one of Jackson's rivals, tried to push a recharter 4 years earlier in 1832. He wanted to use it as a political tool to hamper Jackson's chances of being re-elected. If Jackson signs the bill, he alienates his followers. If he vetoes it, Clay thinks the rich will manage to stop Jackson from being re-elected. Jackson says, "The bank is trying to kill me, but I will kill it." However, Jackson vetoes. Jackson deems the bank not only anti-Western, but also anti-American. He says the bank is unconstitutional. Although the Supreme Court under Marshall had said the opposite in the case of McCulloch versus Maryland, Jackson acts as if the executive is superior to the judicial. A key example of how Jackson uses the powers of the president. How is the bank unconstitutional? Well, the bank is actually run by an aristocratic few, led by Nicholas Biddle, the plutocratic head of the bank. He would lend money to influential men in Congress, and as a result, he was called Emperor Nick of the Bribery Bank. How can a bank be democratic if it is only partial to the aristocracy? Fearing Biddle would force a recharter using his many connections, Jackson pulls out all federal funds and puts the money in his own pet banks. Jackson's cabinet refuses to support his decision at first. However, Jackson changes the members in his cabinet to only follow his rulings, another example of him increasing the powers of the president. In retaliation, Biddle begins to call in all of his debts with increased severity to force the recharter. Unfortunately, many other banks fall out as a result. Wildcat banks, new banks with unreliable currency in the West, went from unreliable to super unreliable. As a result, Jackson is forced to pass the Specie Circular, which stated that all public lands can only be purchased with hard or metallic money. Jackson finally succeeds in getting rid of the bank when it does not get a recharter in 1836. As a result, the bank ceases to be a national institution.
Question 12, how is having a national bank good and bad for Americans? So first I'll talk about the pros of having a national bank. First of all, the bank helped to reduce other bank failures, and also it issued sound currency, opposed to the currency issued by other smaller state banks that was often depreciated and its value ranged from bank to bank, which made transactions very difficult. The sound currency was important to the expanding economy and also domestic and international transactions. It also helped to prevent inflation. The National Bank was also a safe place for government deposits, transactions, and dispersing money. Next, I'll talk about the cons of having a national bank. First of all, the National Bank seemed anti-Western because it closed down many wildcat banks, which was the main source of funding for Western explorers and settlers. And also, the National Bank closed down many Western farms and transferred the money to the East as tribute. The National Bank also seemed slightly tyrannical and corrupt because the president, Nicholas Biddle, held an unreasonable amount of power that many viewed as unconstitutional, and also the National Bank was nicknamed Biddle's Bank because he lent money strategically to gain political allies for the National Bank's recharter. Question number 13.
How did the election of 1832 reflect modern politics? So, the election of 1832. The election of 1832 was the first presidential election to involve three different parties: Democratic, National Republican, and Anti-Masonic. The candidates involved were Democratic incumbent Andrew Jackson, National Republican Henry Clay, Anti-Masonic William Wirt, and John Floyd, who was independent. So Clay was seen as Jackson's strongest opponent in this election. So this was the first time that a third party was actually in the running, and that was the Anti-Masonic Party. So they were fueled by angry feelings against secret societies like, and specifically, the Masonic Order. Their influence started out in New York and then began to spread to Middle Atlantic and New England states, as seen here in the map. So the results of the 1832 election. The breakdown of the results showed that Jackson had a clear victory. Not only did he receive the most electoral votes, he also had the most popular votes. Clay was not far behind in popularity, but was far behind in electoral votes. The other two candidates each had a few votes in one state as well. This shows the roots of what we see today in presidential elections, with both electoral votes and popular votes playing a role for several candidates for president. The significance of the election of 1832. So Jackson won by a huge margin, and this was in part to the Anti-Masonic Party, who drew away some of the anti-Jackson votes from Clay. This weakened Clay and lowered his chances of being president. This election also led to the dissolving of the National Republican and Anti-Masonic parties, leading to the creation of the Whig Party. This also further solidified having only two parties and their roles in government. It also pushed America to become more democratic. New ideas emerge. Some new ideas emerged from this election, mostly headed by the Anti-Masonic Party. This was the first election to have nominating conventions for naming candidates, a job previously completed during congressional caucuses, state legislators, or non-representative political meetings. During the election of 1832, there were three conventions held in Baltimore, Maryland. The process of holding nominating conventions for naming candidates is still carried out today. The Anti-Masonic Party also had party platforms in which they expressed their views on issues. This set of goals is still present in present-day parties and candidates. Finally, the Anti-Masonic Party were the first to publish party newspapers, much like the campaigning of today.
Thanks for listening.